Hello and welcome to today's episode of the On the Up podcast brought to you from Moneypenny. I'm your host Dan Marshall and today I'm going to be joined by Emma and Donna from Empro and we're going to be talking about all things creating an amazing workspace to drive growth in your business. Emma, Donna, do you guys want to kick off by giving us a little bit of an intro to yourselves and what Empro does as a business?
Yeah, my name's Emma and I'm the founder and MD of Empro. So my background is mobilising larger web contracts. So I'm famous for mobilising DWP in 2017. And after that, I set up Empro, which is a bespoke consultancy focusing on the built environment. And we focus all things change and transformation, whether that's people, technology or process. And yeah, great to be here today.
Thanks, Emma. And Donna?
Yeah, I'm Donna Uden. I'm consulting director for Empro. I started my career when I was 16 at what was London Weekend Television then, but is now ITV. I spent many years there, mainly on production, location filming. And then I came back into studios when my kids stopped recognising me. I was away filming so much. And started looking after all the studios, dressing rooms, client rooms, and sort of fell in, as a lot of us do, into FM and then into all their refurbishment projects and major relocation projects for them, together with projects in the north for Coronation Street and Emmerdale. Joined Empro just over a year ago, so I left ITV 18 months ago, having delivered a massive relocation project for ITV, and yeah, really enjoying it and glad to be here today to talk a bit more about what we do.
Amazing. It's great to have you both on and I'm sure from both your experiences at Empro, but also at ITV as well, Donna, there'll be some cool offices and office spaces that you guys have worked in. So who better to talk about creating engaging workspaces, really? I thought as an initial kind of kickoff, it might be nice for us to just kind of think about kind of what today's workplace looks like and how that's changed over the years. And I guess in many senses, a lot of that will have spearheaded a little bit in the last 5 years post-pandemic, really. So be good to hear your thoughts about kind of what the workplace looks like right now and the changes you guys have been seeing in recent times.
As I said, I joined ICD a very long time ago when it was London Weekend Television, and I joined the typing pool, the script typing pool, with rows and rows of desks of typists, supervisor sitting at the front on the desk on a platform, so she could keep an eye on all this. So we've seen so much change. I've seen so much change throughout. And ITV, when I was looking after their buildings, we took a lease on a building in Holborn near Waterhouse Square, and it was built in the late 1800s for a major insurance company. And the boardroom was absolutely spectacular. And there was a tiny room next to the boardroom, more of a cupboard. And I asked what that was for. And apparently the secretary had to sit in there to take the minutes because no women were allowed in the boardroom.
Wow.
So quite interesting. We definitely have broken down and taken down walls since then. So, good to see all those things. Smoking rooms, yes, smoking in offices. I remember that when I first started work, and smoking rooms. So glad to see all those have gone. For the big relocation project for ITV, moved all their central London offices out to White City, which was the last big project I worked on. There was a lot of staff engagement on that project. And one thing that caused the most debate was the gender neutral toilets. And people were very, very against them. But once we moved in, after about a week, it all died down. We had a very good cleaning regime. But I think for staff as well, it was just about there was going to be a lot of change. And I think that's the one thing they really focused on. But actually, they adapted. Once we moved into the building, it was absolutely fine. And I think we all get used to gender neutral toilets now where we go. And the workplace has come a long, long way. And in 30, 35 years, which isn't actually a long time, so coming from the typing pool to where we are now.
Yeah, it seems like a crazy shift from a room for a typist because women weren't allowed in the boardroom to gender neutral toilets. It's quite the journey and quite the positive journey, I think, as well. It's madness to think that it existed a time where anyone wouldn't be allowed in the boardroom because of for any reason like that to being kept in their own room. There is seems so bizarre now, like you say, in what is not really that long a time period, is it? So
I think
good
we've probably
progress.
gone a little bit further even from then. So we did a project it was just coming out the other side of COVID. And we were doing some end user engagement in terms of what would you want from your new office, what would you like it to look like, feel like, and there was all the stuff that's kind of standard now, like with the gender neutrality and the no plastics. But actually, really interestingly, some of the team were asking for not a human crash, but a dog crash. They were like, we've all got puppies now. We can't just come back into the office. What are we going to do about dogs? And that was really some of the feedback from an engagement session. I found it really interesting. I mean, they didn't actually end up with the dog crash. They decided to not go ahead with that idea. But yeah, again, just the huge transition and shift we've had. It's incredible, really.
It's interesting. I've not heard of a dog crash in an office before. I always remember, I think it was Stephen Bartlett's company where they put a slide in the office and that kind of went viral in the press, didn't it, a few years back now? But a dog crash is a new one. I'm here for it though. If we
Me
had a
too.
dog crash, it sounds great. It would be good fun. But so I guess that there's two interesting things that you both mentioned there actually. So Donna, you mentioned, you know, when you were doing those projects at ITV, there was lots of change, and then Emma, you've spoken there about talking to staff as well when you're effectively designing these new workspaces. So immediately they struck me as two quite important things of understanding what people want, but also helping people through change as well, because there's quite significant things happening. So maybe deal with the change element of that first. Like, kind of how do you guys look to make sure that you're managing change effectively with the organizations you're working with, but also with their people who are going to be in these offices?
Yes, change management can be difficult because what people want and what they need are often two different things. And the engagement is really key, and giving it a good period of time to do it, not just sort of people get an email saying this is what's happening. You know, it's really, really important to have those sessions and continue engagement. And somebody told me a long time ago, never presume or assume that you know what people want. You need to talk to them, and that's really key around diversity and accessibility as well. You know, we see somebody in a wheelchair and we think we know what they want and need, but actually we need to talk to people. And on the big ITV relocation project, and then a big project I did last year for Empro, for another big corporate company, staff engagement was key. But also, you know, talking to the senior stakeholders and the exec about what the culture is. That's really important to understand what the culture of the company is, what their vision is. That's really key, and that vision gets delivered, and how they see the workplace experience for their staff as well. So very much engagement from the top down. And when we really understand what the culture is and what the exec want, then talking to the staff and really making sure they understand what that is, why they're being asked to do it, and what their thoughts are as well. So yeah, really, really key. And both projects were very successful because of long engagement at all levels. And I've done other projects where there wasn't time to do it, and it wasn't as successful.
And in terms of that engagement, then how do you guys typically work that? Is that face-to-face discussions, group sessions, surveys? Like, what's the kind of the ways that you would go about it?
I think all of the above. I think it's varied. I think surveys important. For the ITV project, we had a page on the intranet, and you know, it had FAQs and it encouraged people to sort of put things on there and come back to us. So there was that, but also town halls. We worked in the last project I worked on with the leaders, the business leaders, so they were really doing really good communications with their teams about the working week being Monday to Friday and coming in 3 days a week, how that was going to work with neighbourhoods. So the leaders were really, really well briefed by the board, and they were very good at engaging as well. So I think at all levels that engagement needs to happen. They're not just us, Empro, who come in and do that consultancy. It needs to be within the business as well. And listening, really listening to people. And sometimes people don't always say what they want or need because maybe their boss is sitting there. So that's where our expertise comes in, because we can actually, you know, when somebody says X, we know they probably mean Y.
Yeah.
Because we've done it so much, and that's key. That's the value that Empro will add to any business.
I'm always interested when talking to people that kind of do these sorts of projects, and you mentioned there, people will say they want X, but they mean Y. So how much of what you guys do is is kind of based on your knowledge of past projects and things like that.
I think one of the biggest things that ITV did was they had a tower, 22-floor-story tower on the South Bank, quite famous. And they were all cellular offices and everyone had to go open plan. It was a big, big change. And they did that 25, nearly 30 years ago before anyone else was doing it. So it was a big change. And people, would say, I don't like my chair or I don't like the lighting. But invariably it was because now their boss wasn't in office anymore and they were sitting opposite them. So lots of when you've done a lot of things, you hear the same things coming through and you can sort of see through it. So I think that's really, really important that when you're doing workplace consultancy and change management, that you have somebody really, really experienced there who's done this before and heard a lot of different things. Back to what I said though, listening to people, taking the time to listen and not assume.
There's a project I've been on again previously, and a really good example of kind of bringing your experience through is we were in the middle of a big transformation of a building, and the architects had pulled all these beautiful designs together. Everything laid out perfectly in the building. They knew what they needed to fit in, etc. But nobody had necessarily looked at the design and thought of the flow of the people. And so what I'd actually, from looking at the design, they'd put the exec floor on the floor that would have the canteen catering area. And they're going to have all of these new iPads, and it sounded fantastic. One of the things we picked up on is actually if there's ever a queue, that queue was going to back down through all of the exec floor and outside of their offices. And was that really kind of the look and feel that they were going for? And just as a result of having past experience of doing that, we actually managed to redesign it while it was still not going to have a massive cost on the project, and kind of avoided that clash because we were essentially filtering quite a big audience of people through a smaller catering provision, and there would have been that clash. So a lot of it is down to experience and knowledge and kind of having that foresight into how buildings are going to flow. And I just touching upon what we talked about with inclusion and accessibility. I've been in a wheelchair before, and I can fully understand now some of the issues in how inaccessible some of our infrastructure is. And there's a fabulous organisation called Trelaws. They're actually a charity, and they're pretty much in the south, but they travel nationally. And they're running a program at the moment. It's called Let Me In. So somebody from a local site will actually come and visit your site and do an audit of how accessible your building is, and this will be from somebody who has issue with mobility. So it will be somebody that will give you a full report on how accessible your building is from their point of view. And that's been a fabulous kind of campaign to be involved in. It's doing some really, really good work. So if anybody wanted some support from an expert in that area, I'd point you to have a look at Trelaws because they're a really great organisation.
I think Emma's absolutely right, and it's back to not just assuming we know. We've got extensive knowledge and experience, but especially around diversity and accessibility, it's really, really important that you sometimes reach out to expertise or experts for that knowledge.
Yeah, I suppose there are different experts for different things, really, aren't there, as well? Like you
Yeah,
kind
we
of
are.
mentioned in that example, Emma, of like, yeah, but architects could design an office, but are they really thinking about how the space works and how people use it? And again, like you said, we could go and think that a building looks accessible, but until you've experienced that with an accessibility challenge, you're not going to necessarily know, are you? So I think it's important, and that goes across any project, really, doesn't it, that a business is doing, whether it's workplace or more day-to-day operations. You need expertise to help guide and shape you and push in the right direction.
That's
Um,
it.
I'm interested as well, in kind of coming back to that around sort of your expertise then, and where businesses kind of come to you, because you mentioned in that example, Emma, you're almost kind of there, later in the project at that point where you were kind of re-engineering the space that an architect's designed. But like when would a business typically come to you guys, and what would their objective be, or what would they be challenging you with when they first speak to you?
That's a great question. Me and Donna have actually done a little bit of work on this really recently, because on the times that we've been brought in quite recently, it's probably been too late in the process, and we would have thought actually if we'd have come in 3-6 months earlier, we could have avoided a lot of the challenges that we're now seeing. And it's a difficult question, right? Because not everybody will go for an office move or a workplace transformation or be leading one. And if you haven't done it before, you don't know. So you don't know what to expect. You don't know what normal looks like. You don't know how long the planning cycle takes.
Mm.
And I would always say, like, earlier the better. So we can help with, decision making, with understanding pitfalls, lessons learned, where we've seen things go wrong before. The earlier that we can get in and advise, the kind of the best you'll get of our support. And I think Donna's probably got a heap of examples and more information about kind of the different cycles. But yeah, most often we get called in too late, and we would much prefer it to be earlier. But it really depends on where you are on your journey, what lease breaks you've got coming up, and what your kind of intent is.
Hmm.
But always with a move, these projects aren't fast. They're lengthy, and they require a lot of planning. And ultimately, it's about work and people. So it really just needs some thorough consideration.
Yeah, I agree with Emma, and I think we've just done a bit of mapping out what that journey looks like. And I think, at the real estate, the corporate real estate stage, where people are looking at lease breaks or moving maybe in a couple of years, and so very early on in the process, we can help shape things for them and bring that expertise in. And even with architects, once they've engaged with an architect, because the temptation is companies go out and look and say, well, it's an ideal building, but haven't really taken the time to check the culture's right and actually do their workplace strategy. So sometimes you're left with a building and we have to fit the workplace strategy around it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah, as Emma said, as early on as possible.
That's a really good point. We've been called into two recently. And the client has said, all the clients were, they're lovely, but they were like, right, we know where we're going, we've signed a lease, and this is it. And it's like, okay, do you know how many people? They're like, not yet. Then it's like, right, okay, how many people are going to be able to fit in the building? What's the desk ratio look like? And you're often trying to, like, retrospectively make it work, as
Yeah.
saying, well, actually, you've got this today. What's your intention over the next 5 years? Are you going to grow? Are you going to shrink? Are you going to be more agile? What does all that look like? And it's not always a straightforward answer. There's so many variables. But sometimes, people think of it as moving house. I'm like, I've got my house, I'm going to move into it. But there's so many other things that go into
That's what makes it exciting and challenging. That's what we love, isn't it, Emma?
it. We love a challenge. We love a challenge.
Definitely. And yeah, that's kind of why I was thinking about, like, what's the objective of the business as well, right? Because if you're thinking of a move because you just got a break in your lease, versus you're already thinking ahead and you're gonna 2-3x your workforce in the next 2 years, you've got a very different perspective on what you need and what you want, haven't you? So I guess the sooner that people can engage with people like yourselves with the expertise and the knowledge, it can help shape what they do, because you wouldn't want to end up going through a big project to then have to redo that project in another year's time because you didn't think it through properly, or you missed something. So there's
And
quite a
that does
lot to
happen.
consider.
Yeah, it does
Mm.
happen, unfortunately, and it ends up costing companies lots of money. So yeah.
They're the biggest overheads, really. If you think about what a business needs to operate, generally people, and you generally have an office or a facility of some kind. So your assets are normally your biggest cost. So if you get the facility element wrong, and if you get the people element wrong, those are the two most important parts of any business, arguably. So yeah, it's for us, it's a no-brainer. But I guess, when you're going on that journey, you think, I don't want to engage a consultant. Is it going to be expensive? And actually, probably the value you'd get out of the advice probably way outweigh the cost. So yeah.
100%. And I guess as well, there's so many kind of different things happening and different movements happening in the world as well, that if you're caught up in your own business and you're running a company, and you could be an accountant, you could be a lawyer, you could be any type of business doing this sort of project, you're probably not as in tune with what is going on in workspaces, or even just you're thinking of some of the shifts in the things that you have to deal with, so like the accessibility things, or even down to how people now work with kind of hybrid work and stuff like that coming up more and more. So there's obviously going to be huge value in them coming to people like yourselves for that kind of input. How do you guys kind of find that whole hybrid remote office kind of culture right now? Like, what does that mean for kind of your projects that you're working on, and how you guys approach things now?
So I think, just from my point of view, that I think it's really, we focus on the office and the people coming into the office, but it's really key to focus on how that's working with people working at home. And there are people who work remotely all the time and very rarely come into the office. So it's really sort of finding something that will work for everyone. So people now at home have probably, the majority of people, it doesn't work for everyone, but they've probably set themselves up quite nicely. So they've got flexible spaces at home. Now that could mean they've got their desk at home, but they go out to the cafe or they go to the gym, and they go to different spaces depending what they're doing, whether it's a Teams call or focus work. Or so to come into the office, it's got to be attractive. So the workspaces have to be there and the variation of them. And invariably, when they come in, they want a touchdown point for email, but they're coming in to collaborate. So all the teams are coming in together to be together. So I think that's really key, that if people are going to come in from home and work with the people in the office, that they have really, really good collaboration spaces. Not to the detriment of quiet areas, focused areas, but it really needs to be a mix. But it needs to be attractive for staff to come in. That's for sure. It needs to be as flexible as they've got set up at home. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I mean, I think a big driver for me is coming together with purpose. So a lot of the time when we get together in person, it's always very sociable. So if I had a day of back-to-back meetings, there probably would be very little point in me coming in and being sat on a call for most of the time, unless it was in person.
Mm.
And I think, just in our business alone, we deal with so many different things. We've got projects, so that we've got teams up and down the UK to different projects. We've got part of our team is based on talent and recruitment, so they're all sat together because they want to kind of speak to each other all the time. And we work seamlessly across both of those organisations. And I think that's down to the technology that we use and the flexibility that we use, and be really in touch with one another. Um, and I think, well, for example, we're going to get together tomorrow and Thursday. We're bringing the whole team together and making it about coming together with purpose, having a team meeting and doing something socially. And I think that's really, you've got to focus on the culture and what you're trying to drive, not necessarily where people are, because if you're focused on where they are, not necessarily the output and the results, you're going to kind of focus on the wrong things. So technology is a massive driver to support the way business operates, but for me, it comes back to culture as opposed to location, and that's got to be led from the top, right? It'll be led from anywhere else. So
And I think,
100%.
I am nosy by nature. So I love going around looking at companies and how they're designing their workspaces. And I think there's some really great, fantastic work being done there on designing workspaces, some really good stuff out there. And I can see why, people, they want to get people back because they've really designed the workspaces to support them. So yeah, fair play to all the designers out there. They're doing good work. And also, I think companies have got a really good, clear vision now of how they want to support the workplace experience. And I think that's top up there on the agenda, together with well-being as well, is really key.
Mm.
So, it's good work going on.
I was going to ask if you felt that, because you see a lot of kind of return to office mandates and stuff on social media nowadays, don't you? And I do think that it's really interesting how you said, Emma, come together with purpose. I think that businesses, like, we certainly see some businesses that seem to be creating their office space to encourage more people to come in with purpose, to collaborate on different projects, versus the others that still just kind of saying, we want you back in the office, come back in the office, sort of thing. The one you can see, I think, those organizations that are thinking about how do we kind of make a space that encourages people in. And I think ultimately, I guess that is one of the great things about having an amazing workspace, which I feel like I always say this with quite a bit of bias, because sat behind me you can see like the middle of the Moneypenny offices, which